Greetings, Earthlings, and welcome to this tiny garage. We're getting so close to getting the engine out of this Porsche. Last week we got to step 25. This week I feel compelled to start on step 26. This week we're going to have to take apart a bunch of the stuff underneath the car. I don't know what you think when you look at this picture, but for me, the first time, it was clear as mud. I mean, I could pick out a couple of things, shock absorbers and stuff like that. Before I started jumping around under the car, I wanted to go over what the different parts are and where they are. This really helped me understand what the parts do and how I'm supposed to get them off. In general, the engine comes out the bottom. And so anything that's underneath the engine has to get taken off. So if you imagine here is just a regular old car and it has a chassis. And the chassis is made up of two main things. You got the frame rails. There's a frame rail on the passenger side and a frame rail on the driver's side. And then on that you have subframes. And the rear subframe is the one that we're interested in. So at the back of the car on the Porsche we have a bar going across just like that. Behind that is mostly the engine. As we spoke about before, the crankcase with the 6 cylinders off to each side. And then mostly in front of the rear subframe is the transmission. Next up is the reinforcing brace. We'd already taken that off in episode 6, step 7, right before we took off the middle coolant hoses, so that one was done already. Then we have the axle shafts that are bolted onto the sides of the transmission by these CV joints inside these boots. The construction of the CV joint is pretty complex with all those ball bearings, but it's kind of like a U-joint. It just allows the transmission to put the power to the wheels, but also allows the wheels to bounce up and down if they need to. Then comes the rear axle cross brace. These are two pieces of metal that go at diagonals from one side of the car to the other. At the very back, they join to the subframe, and then at the front, they join to the body of the car, but underneath those plastic side wheel trim parts. Then on the very top front right of the transmission is the brake light switch. Then a little further back are the gear selection levers. On the driver's side of the transmission, just above the drive axle, is the clutch slave cylinder. And finally, at the back of the car, between cylinders 5 and 6 on the right-hand side, is the ground strap. Would you like your car to handle less like this and more like this? Then you need a stabilizer bar or a sway bar. This is a thick piece of springy metal that on the Porsche is attached to the bottom of the shock absorbers and then is also bolted to the rear subframe to provide stiffness to the rear suspension. To take off the rear stabilizer bar, of course we're going to use more WD-40. I promise to stop mentioning that, just assume it from now on. You need 2 wrenches. You need a 15mm on the actual nut and then a 17mm open wrench to hold the other side of that nut so you can wrench on it. And then the stabilizer bar is held on with these clamps onto the rear subframe, and those are 2 13mm bolts. As everything on this car seems to be more or less 13mm. Then moving over to the other side, same old thing really. That is the sway bar link that is attaching it to the shock absorber. And then once they're all off, it did just pop off very easy. That was an easy thing to take off. Next we have those plastic rear wheel trims. They're in the front of the rear wheel arch. You have to pop them off first, and then we're going to use that access to be able to get to these small plastic trims at the bottom of the wheel arch. You're going to use a T30 star drive to get the front one off. Then there's one in the back as well. There is a third one underneath there, but we took it off in order to get the rear under tray off. And then there is just one crosshead screw in the back there, and it does come off. And the lift and those pads don't make any difference. It comes off no problem. Now that we have that plastic molding off, we do get access to this 15mm bolt, which is the front part of the rear axle cross brace. taking that off was relatively easy now with that plastic piece off. I did come across a problem with the scissor jack pads. They were a little too much in the way to be able to get those nuts all the way out, so I left them for now and I'm going to come back. Then in the middle of those cross braces there was another 15mm bolt, and then at the back on each side there is a 16mm. My electric wrench had trouble with that, so we had to get the big hammer out again to give that a little encouragement, and then that did come off okay. And then here was my plan to be able to get those front bolts off. I lowered the car onto some axle stands, and then as I lowered it further, it made the front do a little bow, and I was able to get those bolts off each side pretty easy, and there's that cross brace coming off as well. So I was kind of stressed out about that, but in the end it did work out just fine. Hey, a quick hello to Peter Dames and Arnold Mosk. You know who you are. Thanks, guys. And here comes the lower subframe that we talked about at the very beginning of this video. I apologize that the camera, of course, did focus on the exhaust manifold in the center, and so the subframe is a little out of focus. Here I'm using an 18mm wrench to loosen those front nuts, but then you do need an 18mm on the front and a 16mm on the back to be able to get those to come undone. In the end, not too bad. There's just 2 on each side. I hammered them out with, a combination of tools, and then looking on the other side here, same thing really. Once I got them all loose, trying to get it out was a little more challenging. It did seem like the exact right size to slot out, and it was, but the technique in the end was to push it back up, lubricate the whole thing with WD-40, of course, and then I used the plastic hammer once I got it all completely lined up just to tap it out, and then it came out no problem.
With these rather meaty tyres off the car, it's a good time to talk about tyre size. The numbers here say 285, 35, 19. So those numbers refer to the size of the tyre, and 285 means that this width here is 285 millimeters, which is between 11 and 12 inches. The 35 means that 35% of that is this tyre wall size. So if you take a calculator and do 285 times 0.35 equals, you're going to come out with 99.75 millimeters, which right here is 100 millimeters, which is pretty much that number. And you can see that the tyre wall, including the tyre wall that goes into the rim, is 100 millimeters. Now that final number, 19, goes back to imperial or American inches, and that is referring to the diameter of the rim, the metal part. So this ruler is 18 inches across, and so you can see that yes, that rim is 19 inches across. So that's what those 3 numbers mean. They're just talking about this tyre size.
The ground strap was next. That's between cylinders 5 and 6, bank 2, which is on the passenger side, 13mm of course, a very easy job to take that off. Next up is those CV joint mounting bolts. This one did actually fill me with a little bit of terror. I was expecting to have to undo a few and then go into the car, lower it, turn the axle a little bit to gain access to the other ones, but no. Porsche, in their infinite wisdom again, left plenty of space. You don't have to rotate anything. You just get that Allen wrench, the H8 Allen wrench on there, and go at it, and they all come off. They didn't come off enough. They kind of sort of stick against that rubber boot. That's enough to get them all loose, and then once you do get them all loose, it does pop off very easy. But here's my recommendation: don't take them all off. Loosen them all, but leave 2 of them, maybe 3 of them, in there a few turns, and that's going to help you take the other side off. If you take all of them off, the other side rotates too easily, and so that is my tip of the day. Next then was the shift cables. It was kind of awkward. You can see I dropped one off there after squeezing it with the channel locks. I don't know if there is a better way, but the channel locks did work to get the clips off the one end. Once you get the clips off that allow the cables to come free of the chassis of the car, you need to undo the very end of the cables that go onto these little metal balls. I tried the crowbar and that didn't really work at all, but in the end, just a chunky flathead screwdriver was all you needed to get those gear shifter cables off. Alright, the backup light switch. So this was a difficult place to get a camera and a difficult place to get your hand. Now that little plastic thingy, the black part on the top of that white part, is all you have to get off. It seemed like you're supposed to squeeze those two parts together. I tried my hands, I tried channel locks, I tried a screwdriver, I tried this small little vice grip that I have. It seemed to squeeze them okay, but nothing happened. In the end, in the back, there's just this one little piece of plastic. If you push the bottom part back away from the white, it slides up and away, no problem at all. So that's my gift to you. Again, that was a pain in the butt. All right, this next one did fill me with fear when I heard about what we're supposed to be doing here. It is the clutch slave cylinder. What we're looking at here is right above the driver's side drive axle. If you're trying to find the slave cylinder, there's a blue pipe on that side of the car. If you follow that blue pipe all the way along, at the end is this slave cylinder. On the top of the clutch slave cylinder is a 13mm bolt. It was pretty awkward, but I did undo that. Underneath it, by bending up those metal coils, I did actually get another 13mm in there for the second bolt. Once those two bolts were out of the way, you could actually see it. That little thing there is what actually engages or disengages the clutch when you press the pedal in the car. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you very much for watching. Till next time.